So for today's program, today's speaker is David Ornstein.
Hello.
Dr. Ornstein is a tenured full professor of anthropology at Medgar Evers College of the University of New York. He's co-author of two books, the 2015 Godless Grace.
It's okay.
3 books. We'll tell Eric. The 2015 Godless Grace, How Non-Believers Are Making the World Safer, Richer, and Kinder, and the November 2019 publication of Darwin's Apostles, The Men Who Fought to Have Evolution Accepted Their Times and How the Battle Can Turns. You want to tell us about your third book?
Yes, the third book is a book that's called The Tale of Many Trees, and it is a children's guide to human evolution.
Oh.
Yeah. Because I go to a lot of different elementary schools, and the teachers always say, "Oh, we wish we had a concise little book to give the kids." So I said, "Well, here it is."
The title again?
A Tale of Many Trees.
A Tale of Many Trees. Okay.
Just last year, so that's what.
Okay, good. All right. A primatologist by early training, he has written for numerous national and international freethinker and science publications. Dr. Ornstein is a noted civil and human rights activist representing the American Humanist Association at the United Nations through the NGO DPI program. Dr. Ornstein is a sought-after speaker on human rights, science education, and evolution acceptance. Dr. Ornstein is also an ordained humanist chaplain who serves on the board of several local and national organizations, including the American Humanist Association, the Secular Humanist Society of New York, the broader Social Impacts Committee of the Hall of Human Origins Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., and also served as a board member and treasurer for the Center for Free Thought Equality. So let's give.
Thank you. I don't know what to say. I'm humbled by the introduction, especially since it's all propaganda. You know. I saw a lot of you looking at my former students over there. Which, by the way, if you want now, at any time, this is not a museum, so if you want to go over and touch and feel and pick them up and turn them around and do all of those things, I'm not insulted or feel like you're not paying attention. They're there for you to see it, because if you go to a museum, you can't do that, but here you can. And so these are all museum quality, and I hope you'll get a chance to play with them a little bit. Funny story, I was in Poland last March, and I've never known fear and this is, I've had 3 open heart surgeries, and I've never known fear until I had to take on my carry-on case about 20 of those through TSA. Because I think that they thought that they had like an axe murderer or like, you know. But fortunately, because I'm from New York, as I think some of you are, we're all in the same sort of geographic area. When I went through at Kennedy Airport, they looked at me and they said, "This is the least of what we have to find." And I realized, yeah, this is New York. If this was Iowa, I'd probably be arrested or, you know, I'd be sent to Guantanamo Bay or something. But here they just said, "It's Tuesday, go right ahead." So thank you all. You know, the way I got here today was I spoke at the Secular Humanist Society of New York, and then one of your board members approached me to come and speak to you as well. And in a former life, I used to live in Manalapan, so not too terribly far from here. So I like being back in Springsteen country, and I love seeing everybody here today. So thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for your time and attention. So my talk today is really in 4 parts. And we're gonna go, I'll try to do this. I'm from Brooklyn originally, so I'll talk fast because I know I only have an hour. I drive my students crazy with a lot of these things too. So if there's anything that you feel like I'm glossing over, or if you have any questions about anything, after the talk today, please, I know we have time for Q&A, and also what I'd like to say is, you know, I'm a very public figure, so you can find me on Facebook, you can find me through my college. Let this be the start of a conversation. So if you have any questions going forward, hit me up. You know, this doesn't end when the program ends today. So what I really want to start with is first talking about what I believe is, or what I conclude is the elegance of evolution. What I find so what I'm so impassioned about when I think about natural selection and evolution is how right and correct the assumptions based on science, since even before Darwin, we have reached a point where we can now know ourselves through our past. In fact, I think knowing our past makes us better humans today. And it certainly should help us become better humans in the future. Understanding the naturalistic development of our species in competition with so many others, just look at the table over there. We are quite literally the last hominin standing. You know, by about 25,000 years ago, any other hominin that was competing had gone extinct. And while in the past it used to be, oh, here's this line of evolution, the reality is it's not a line. It is not a linear process. It is a very complex process that looks much more than even a bush or a tree, because it is so complex and there are so many also-rans that make up who we are, that are not only in the fossil record, but in your genes as well. I'm assuming everybody here probably has descendants from either Asia or Europe. And if you do, I can almost guarantee you have some percentage of Neanderthal DNA. That's right, some more than others. Some of them get elected to the presidency. Sorry. I'm not going to go there, I promised I wouldn't go there. But we have a functional and should have a fundamental view of the planet, because understanding the planet that we live on helps us better understand ourselves and our place on this planet. So, you know, when we think about science, and especially evolutionary science, we're really looking at taking a very holistic approach of what it means to not only have a planet, but what it means to be human. So we use the tools of science to be able to inform our reality. These laws that are expressed through evolutionary biology concerning not only our species that is here today, but all of these species that have gone before us. We are 1% of the biodiversity that has ever existed on the planet. And I don't mean just humans, I mean all of the biodiversity that is on this planet right now is 1% that has ever lived on the planet, which means 99% through at least 5 different mass extinctions and background extinctions are gone. Gone. So if you've never thought of yourself as the 1%, you are. If you've never thought of yourself as a lottery winner, you have won the cosmic lottery of being alive. And I think as humanists, that is a very humbling experience as well. And I certainly think as an anthropologist and humanist, that's the case. And then of course, you know, evolution does not live and die on its sword. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. and it is connected to so many other areas of inquiry to help us inform not only where we've been yesterday or 25,000 years ago or 1 million years ago, but 8 million, 12 million, 65 million years ago, at least, if not even further. Mammals existed even during the time of dinosaurs. We don't hear about them, but we know that through mass extinction that they were able to occupy niches that before they couldn't. So learning about life on Earth is more than just anthropology. It is physics, it is chemistry, it is the sciences, it is astronomy, so on and so forth. And when we take this fundamental view and we pack it into evolutionary biology, we get a clearer, maybe not necessarily a cleaner picture, but definitely a clearer picture of where we've been. And by the way, that's changing all of the time. In fact, even in this presentation today, I was just down at the Smithsonian just a few weeks ago, and the last fossil that has been found to be archaic human, right, is from Morocco, which is about 350,000 years ago. Well, lo and behold, because times are changing all the time and finds are being found all the time, they just found something new, which is going to now push the evidence for, okay, not the idea, but the evidence for our species' existence on the planet back to about 625,000 years ago. It's not even published research yet. You're getting in on it. Okay, so buy my, no, I'm kidding. Yeah, it's not a Ponzi scheme, I tell you, anthropology is not a Ponzi scheme. So, based on this, and what I love talking with humanists about is that because you sort of already know this, because you already have an inclination towards science and reality and so on and so forth. But I always like to go over this because this is fundamental in order to really have an ability to say, yes, I understand this, and I see that over there. We have to know the background, right? So we know that, the Earth is 13.5 billion years. Anyone here want to disagree? Raise your hand. Okay. The Earth has been here for 4.5 billion years. It took 1 billion years before life could even start on the planet. It took another 600 million years after that for sexual reproduction, or at least eukaryotic cells to grow, with a nucleus. That we have been evolving as a species within the family of primates for at least 60 million years. And that all of this diversity and natural selection continues today and will continue into the future unless we mess it up, right? We are biological organisms, and our fate is ultimately to pass on our genes to the next generation, if we're able to do so. So that is the future. We have, and this is why I didn't update the slide, so we can, it used to be, Homo sapiens, sure, 125,000 years ago, 250,000 years ago. Then there's this Morocco find that puts us at about 300,000 years ago, except, well, if the find is from 300,000 years ago, that means that we had to exist here before that, which means that it's probably 350,000 years ago, and now, bam, he has this jaw that I held in my hand, okay, that's putting us back now 600,000 years. Yeah, it's wild, isn't it? Wake up the next day and you have a totally different reality, right? It was a time when even, I'm sure we all learned about this in school. You would go to school, and if you learned anything about natural selection or human evolution, it was us and Neanderthals. That was it. There were no other competing archaic human species. But now we have Denisovians, right? We have Homo florensis. So we have we have Homo naledi, we have Homo longi. I'll show them to you. So what it shows is up until literally 25,000 years ago, we did not serve as, whoops. Is it something I said? Is that, I'm not going to get Salman Rushdie here. So we know that really there are fundamentally three different forms that make up natural selection. The first, of course, is adaptation. That is, a species will continue to adapt over time within a particular ecology, right? We can see all of this adaptation in this room. Look around, okay? But we know that, there are people with variety of different pigments, height, hair color, textures. All of that is human variation. All of that is human adaptation. And we pass that on, of course, to other generations. The second is speciation, where one species will lead to one or more new species. We ourselves are certainly within the context of this, right? We could not exist unless Homo erectus existed and then speciated and left us both on the same trail of Neanderthals and anatomically modern humans or archaic humans. So the speciation. And the last, of course, and these are all running all the time, is extinction. So adaptation is just change over time, which is what Darwin talked about. Speciation is one species leading to quite a number, maybe one, maybe 50, like if we look at Darwin's finches. Anyone here have ever been to the Galapagos Islands? Okay, so you know Darwin's seminal work is looking at finches. Alfred Russel Wallace was looking at butterflies in Central America, South America, came to the same conclusions. And extinction, of course, is when we can no longer, or any species can proceed into the future because they can't pass their genetic material on any longer. It could be because of some traumatic event, volcanoes, a meteor hits the Earth 65,000 years ago, there's no time to adapt, so on and so forth. Or there's constant background extinctions going on. There are a number of species that will die off every year for a variety of reasons. Certainly, human-made climate change is having an effect on that as well, and is speeding up the pace of animals becoming extinct or endangered. And so that's all happening at the same time. And as Darwin basically said, and this really in the crux, right, from a message from 1859, right? If we had to boil down what Darwin and Wallace really talked about, is really about if life continuing, but doing so because we pass our traits down, and then the traits that we pass down are survived to subsequent species, or some subsequent individuals to continue the species within a particular environment. That's all of Darwinism in a nutshell. Okay, it's not social Darwinism, which Darwin, by the way, could not stand in his lifetime when things were attributed to him. It's not magic. It is the simple observation that we are a transformative species, as every other species on the planet is. We are constantly in transformation if we survive. And as one of my favorite biologists said, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. That is, you can't really understand biology unless you understand evolution. Because the things that operate in biology, the passing of genes, the changes in the genome, gene flow, genetic drift, all of those things are happening through the mechanics of evolutionary biology and natural selection. So you can't be a biologist, and well, you could, I guess, be, and there might be some at the Discovery Institute, but any biologist worth their salt who is true to the science knows that evolution is true. So, with that, if you want to take a minute and go play with any of the toys over there, you can. Okay. Part two is really to give you a background. Anyone here know about Darwin's life and times? Some of you do. I expect all of you to raise your hand. Okay, and that's okay. That's a good thing, actually, right? Because we're having a conversation. As I always like to say, Darwin in 1859 had a love-hate relationship with not only the fundamental and profound impact he had on the world, but with life in general. He was living at a time of dramatic change, social organization, and social change. Oh,
Okay.
oh, okay. I thought like I'm gonna have like a hook come out and like pull me off, like I'm being played off like at the Academy Awards. Right. So when you look at the surveys that have been done, and you might have even participated in one or two, there are always being surveys done that say, what are the most important things that humans have contributed to make our lives understandable and livable, right? So the idea of farming, relativity, understanding the genome, the concept of zero. Evolution is always one of those that is in there, right? It's sort of understood. Even if it's rejected by a part of the population, for the mass of the population, it's understood that evolution is incredibly important for us as humans to not only know the world, but for us to know ourselves, to understand what makes us human, what our identity is. And so, Charles Darwin is typically comes up as one of the science and personalities in human history that is really important to our own history. Time magazine, which I know is not science, right, did this survey not many years ago, the fundamental, the top 100 people in history. Darwin came in, I think, at number 12 or 13, behind Hitler, which I thought was like really interesting. But as an anthropologist and an advocate for Darwin and Wallace's work, I said, well, let's take out the fascists. Yeah, let's take out the fascists. Let's take out the religious, yay, again. And let's take out the conquerors. And then you see that Darwin comes in like the top 6. In my book, at least. Okay, so he remember Casey Kasem? All right, coming in at number 6, Charles Darwin and his Origin of Species. So, it really takes a village when we think about the holistic view of anthropology and the science of biology. Because even before the Enlightenment, humans had an inkling that indeed we are a part of nature. We know that during certain dark periods in our time, right, that we were not allowed to even think about this, or if we did, we would be jailed or imprisoned or murdered, right? But you can go back for as long as there has almost been theological thought about the nature and the existence of humans. We can argue based on the evidence that there have been philosophers and scientists who might not have said, oh, this is natural selection, right? Something that we've said, okay, but that, yeah, humans arose from water, that transformation is happening all the time, that we fit within the context of other species, that there is no supernatural involvement, in the fact that humans exist. And as Andreas Berzelius, who was an anatomist, said, when he was looking at all the various different things that he was cutting up, including humans, he came to the amazing conclusion that we're not that special. I mean, each and every one of you are, and I love you, but, you know, the fact of the matter is, though, is that there's nothing really special about us. You know, we fit a form, a primate form, which has been going on for quite some time. And then if we don't even look at, like, say, if we stop being so darn Eurocentric and look at, you know, some of the Islamic scientists and philosophers, you know, you have Ibn Khan saying that, you know, we developed from monkeys. You know, by 1406 CE. You know, Darwin never knew this. You probably didn't know this. I didn't know this till I found it out, right? But so there was this idea that we have been evolving for a very long time, being told to us from many different places on the planet by many different people. But we just have to slow down and listen. And we have to understand it. We have to agree. Not mindlessly, mind you. But we have to understand. And so it really is, this is all pre-Enlightenment. By the time you get to Buffon and Linnaeus and Lamarck and some of these names that you probably know, you know, the idea of the system of nature, that, you know, Buffon scared the crap out of the Catholic Church because he said, oh my goodness, turns out the earth is 70,000 years old. It's not a 6-day creation. It's not you know, and it's not a 6,000-year-old earth. And he was saying this in by the way, all these people believed that God started it all, right? But they were also doing, like, not that bad science at the same time, pushing forward the boulder up the hill to the modernity that we all understand, even if we're just lay people and not scientists. So in their own times, they were seen as sometimes rebels, and they were very controversial. I mean, they all, again, took the part, yeah, this is what science is telling us, but God started it all, or God made it happen, so on and so forth. The two geologists that had profound impact on Charles Darwin, Adam Sedgwick and Charles Lyell. In fact, it was Lyell's books that Darwin took on the voyage of the Beagle. Some of you are shaking your heads, so I'm glad you know that. Okay, Adam Sedgwick lived long enough he was deeply religious, to not be a fan of Darwin's work, even after the publication of The Origin of Species, and well into, Darwin died in 1882 and Sedgwick died in 1873. They were enemies till the rest of their life. Not because Darwin chose to be his enemy, but Sedgwick chose to be Darwin's enemy because of the profound nature and importance of his work. So if you go back to the 1850s, just like in the United States, but certainly in Europe, as Darwin is spending 20 years doing his research, you know, coming back from the Galapagos and waiting 20 years to publish, and only publishing because he gets a 20-page paper from someone named Alfred Russel Wallace, who's studying in South America, and comes to the same conclusion. Darwin is working on a book like this, and Wallace sends, you know, a 20-page paper like this to Darwin saying, oh, I figured this out. What do you think, Mr. Darwin? And Darwin practically has a heart attack because it's like, oh, you've said in 20 pages what I've been writing about for 20 years and still haven't published on because I'm afraid how it's going to affect my family. I'm afraid how it's going to affect my wife, more importantly, who is deeply religious. I'm afraid how it's going to affect my standing Darwin was not aristocratic, right? But he did, so he wasn't part of the monarchy or anything, but he did come from a family of wealth. His father was a doctor, he knew that the nature of his work was going to be called into question not only by other scientists, which is actually pretty healthy, but by the social theorists of the time, and definitely the powers that be. Because wait a second, if you say we all came from the same place, well gee, does that mean that we're all equal? And that scared the crap out of Darwin, because that's the ultimate conclusion. Wait a second, we're all the same? So I mean, I can't take that person's country? Or I can't rob them of their wealth, or I can't enslave them because I'm not better than them? And this is what Darwin knew was going to happen. And so at the time, in the 1850s, 1860s, you have all of these, Darwin rides this wave when Origin of Species comes out, because you've got this suffrage movement, you've got the anti-slavery movement, and by the way, Darwin was deeply anti-slavery. Deeply. He wrote about it, and he felt it was immoral. However, Darwin was a human, he was a man, and he lived in a specific time frame, so he was not a suffragist. I hate to blow your minds. But he wasn't into this whole, wait a second, shouldn't women have the same rights as men type of thing. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. So profound here in being able to tell us all about the future and the past, but not being able to see and he said it because he tried to put it in the terms of, well, who is supposed to take care of the children if not the women? This is the viewpoint. I'm not agreeing with it. Don't throw anything at me. I've got 3 of my own. Trust me, I like being with them. But he was not a suffragist. You have at the same time the issues of public education coming into the fold, where you don't just go to a church because you're a particular denomination and maybe you get a 5th grade education, but that you have to be educated from a child to adulthood. Well, adulthood now is when you get your master's degree. And so on and so forth. So this is the context in which Darwin is now coming up in. There's a tremendous amount of social change happening, and he's about to bring that change into the realm of science, because he's the bull in the china shop, and he's gonna break stuff. Of course, he was made fun of, he was ridiculed. Victorian England and Queen Victoria was seances everywhere. If you wanted to be part of the elite in Victorian England, you had to believe in metaphysics. Mysticism and the occult were on the arise. Seances were grand things that people were doing. All this stuff with the occult was happening. You all know what Darwin's degree is in? So Darwin comes from, his father was a physician, and he started in medical school. But he didn't like the sight of blood. And so Darwin's degree from, I think, King's College, is in theology. Because he did 3 things. If you were not part of the aristocracy, but you were wealthy in England, you became a doctor, you became a solicitor, a lawyer, or you became a theologian. That's how you kept your status and your income. Of course, he gets his degree, and he's never really that religious to begin with, but then, of course, because he's also so involved and interested in natural selection, and nature, I should say, not natural selection, that comes later, nature, that he goes on, of course, the voyage of the Beagle, and he comes back after many years, so on and so forth. But he was an incredibly shy person. He never debated. After he published his book, never debated once. Not once. Behind the scenes, everybody was writing to him from various scientific disciplines. That's how Wallace reached out to Darwin. So Darwin was a communicator, but he was not someone who would stand in front of a lectern and talk or try to bring knowledge forward. But if you were a colleague, and you can go online and see the Darwin papers, which are all digitized now, it's incredible how many people, thousands and thousands of scientists, social scientists were writing to Darwin, who he wrote back to on a whole slew of different topics, both science related and humanities related. Fascinating man. All right, so he loses his favorite daughter, Annie, and that really makes him almost into like a hermit, really brings him into himself, depressed, sad, as anyone would be when they lose a child. But, at the same time, of course, he's calling into question this whole idea of organized religion at the same time. When Darwin dies, he dies an atheist. He might have been a deist at one point. He might have been an agnostic later on, but when he dies in 1882, he dies an atheist. And in my book, Darwin's Apostle, I look at, both myself and my co-author, Abby Hafer, look at really the group of people who surrounded Darwin to help make natural selection part of our modernity. Okay, T.H. Huxley, who of course is Darwin's bulldog, Alfred Russel Wallace, who was about 10 years younger than Darwin, who's a naturalist, Draper, who is British but comes to America, helps found NYU Medical School. He is the first person to take a photograph of the moon. And he actually is one of the people who, during the Huxley-Wilberforce debates in favor of Darwin. Asa Gray, who is a botanist in America, from Boston, very important scientist, gets the rights to the origin of species in the United States because people were doing basically bootleg publishing of the book. And he secured even though there was no copyright back then, he secures the rights and is a known collaborator with Darwin. And Darwin's best friend is Joseph Dalton Hooker, who is the chief botanist at the Kew Gardens. And anyone been to Britain and seen been to the gardens at Kew? Joseph Hooker is in 1870 to at least 1890 was the chief botanist. And then of course we talk about, let me just quickly mention the tale of 2 June 30th, as I like to put it. So in 1858, because of that 20-page letter sent to Darwin by Wallace, both Hooker and Huxley say, we have to get in front of this. Hooker and Huxley have both Darwin and Wallace co-write a paper that is presented in 1858, which basically says, guys, natural selection. Right? Means of change. And it becomes this controversy. In 1859, November 22nd, 1859, The Origin of Species is published. And then June 30th, 1860, is the great Huxley-Wilberforce debate. Which, again, at that debate, it wasn't just T.H. Huxley who took down Wilberforce. okay? It was several people with axes in their hand, metaphorically, I should say, okay? Hooker spoke. Draper spoke. So many of these guys wrote articles in their own name, but then in pseudonyms to support Darwin in the scientific press. And if it was, because Darwin was so afraid of conflict and didn't want to be involved in any of it, if it wasn't for these people right here, we may not have the knowledge we have today. So let's go a little bit into the, probably why most of you are here, not just to hear some guy from Brooklyn speak. This is what I like to call the evolutionary record, which I drive my students insane with. Notice it is not a straight line. Notice that there are a lot of names on there. Notice that there are a lot of also-rans. I start us all the way back to some of the earliest Australopithecines. You can see the connections that are both fossil and genetic. And so you see that there's all this diversification, all of this variation, all of this, what did we say? Speciation, adaptation, and extinction. That is the record of the fossil and biological evidence that made us who we are today. And so, oh my goodness, you think, well, the Australopithecines, died out 2 million years ago. Well, wait a second. No, they led us quite possibly to Homo habilis, right? Now we find, the tool making happening, right? But wait a second. In Homo sapien naledi, you find some Australopithecus africanus morphology and genome. So wait a second, this is 335,000 years ago, and these guys are supposed to die out 2 million years ago. What's going on here? And think about it, right? We don't necessarily have the answer. We know God didn't do it. It's the only thing we do know, right? But we do know that there is such diversification and such crowning glory and such connection. 30 years ago, it was just, humans and Neanderthals, and now we have, the Denisovians. We have the hobbits living till only about 25,000 years ago, and so you see all of this diversification happening constantly through not only the evolutionary connections, but through the tree of life just in general, whether you're talking about a rose bush or whether you're talking about humans. So when we talk about the holistic nature of science and evolutionary biology, we're not that different.
Where did Heidelberg come from?
Germany.
Is there an implied line from Homo erectus to Heidelberg?
Well, that's the interesting thing, right? So, used to be, well, hold on a second. It was Homo erectus that led directly to Neanderthal and humans. But wait a second, we're not entirely sure about that anymore. We're now looking at that species as being the species that may have led to us because of differentiation and more science and so on and so forth. So there are question marks all throughout this. This is not a story that's being, humans like answers, right? We like a beginning, a middle, and an end. It makes us feel comfortable, right? It doesn't have to give us this queasy feeling of, but, except we're also a really curious species, right? And we're trying to figure this stuff out. And the reality is that what we took as canon law, pardon the expression, in biological anthropology 25 years ago, or 30 years ago, or 50 years ago, is no longer the same. But that's good science. Not knowing is not bad science. Assuming that it's because of some mythological feature isn't even science. We can't even call it. You know what I mean? But you know, the minute you give up your curiosity, you should be out of the business. And fortunately, there are a hell of a lot of curious people out there, yourselves included, right? In my field, there are lots of people doing a lot of digs all the time to get us closer to what I like to call a modern understanding of where we came from. You know, not a period at the end of the sentence, but if any of you English majors, all these run-on sentences with commas and that kill my students over, okay? Because this isn't just one sentence. This is a long discussion that goes on in many different directions all at once. And one of the things that I think is so important about evolutionary biology in particular is that, you know, when you have your fossils, you've got a pretty strong understanding of the past, because you can relate the features of these fossils to not only those that are found within the context of their own species, but if you have enough evidence, to species that came before, hence everything on that desk over there, right? And so even if you just had evolutionary biology, even if you just had the fossil record, that would be enough to be able to make the strong indication that yes, we evolved from a common ancestor, and yes, we're continuing to evolve today. But when you can add additional science to what we know about the fossil record, that only makes the argument stronger, which is why don't go to Kentucky to the Ark Park. You'll melt like butter because so you have all of this fossil evidence that yes, we are an African primate. We are all an African primate. Our species evolved from Africa and left Africa anywhere between 90 to 125,000 years ago. Homo sapiens sapiens, that is. Homo erectus, actually left sooner than that, at about 2 million years ago. But the point here being is that if you can track another science to the fossil record, you're getting closer and closer to truth. And lo and behold, look at the mitochondrial DNA evidence. Where's the oldest mitochondrial human DNA? It's in Africa. Right? So now, I get chills when I see this. I'm sorry, I've been teaching this for 40 goddamn years, right? And I still get chills from this. So you look at this and you say, my goodness, if we had no other evidence, how great is this? And then of course you find this, and you see the same darn patterns. And we are a pattern-seeking species. So that is really wonderful.
What are the letters?
That is a good question. It's groups of like
Haploids?
haploid groups.
Yeah.
Yeah, essentially haploid groups. Yeah, but the oldest is in Mother Africa. So I brought some of my friends today. Let me just okay. I'll let you go over and take a look. If you want, in fact, let me.
What do you want?
Just bring a whole bunch over. Yeah. In fact, do me a favor. Just hand them out to people. Yeah. Just grab them a whole. Touch them, feel them, turn them over. They'll come to you. They're all replicas. I have not broken into any museums. I'm not. Yeah. So some of these are really, really old, but they're old, off of them, they are, some of the most fascinating parts of this is the fact that we know that, what is a hallmark of our species, of course, is the fact that we're bipedal species, and we see the, love it. No, it's gonna stop.
See what you did?
I know, I love it. No, I'm happy. We are a bipedal species, and we know from the science that big brains came way after bipedalism. And we know that because if you look at the base of, if any of you have, here, let me take this guy. Hold on, you'll excuse me. In fact, nobody took the anatomically modern human.
We all have our own.
I know. That's right. You all carry your own, right? So the way we know that we are a bipedal species, of course, is because of the placement of the foramen magnum, right? Where the spine enters, the spinal column enters into the brain, right? If you look at chimpanzees, the foramen magnum is sort of here, okay? So even though we say that they're bipedal, they're really more quadrupedal in some cases. If you look at dogs, or if any of you have any other pets, where is the foramen magnum? Back of the head right here. How are they walking? 4 legs, right? Okay, us. We're that way. Look at the bottom of some of those critters we got there. Where's the foramen magnum? Especially, right? Same place. Right? Huge clue of where bipedalism starts. So bipedalism, true bipedalism,
Table here.
No, turn around.
Table's here.
So we know that we had to free our hands before we could actually evolve. Our brains, or the species that came before us, the brains were really pretty small, maybe chimp-sized brains. But the magic of bipedalism allowed us to grow bigger brains. So I gave you Ardipithecus, which is running around there somewhere. Ardipithecus is probably most related to what would eventually be several of the Australopithecine species. Again, it could be a root ancestor, but may not be. So everything really has a question mark in it with this stuff. Okay, if we look at Australopithecines, some of you have, Lucy. Do you know how Lucy got her name?
Yes.
Okay, who knows?
Beagles.
What's that?
When Johansson discovered her, they were playing the Beatles song.
That's right, Lucy in the Sky. Bravo. That's how Lucy got her name. And the fascinating thing with Lucy is, and the most really important thing, which really helped us understand that this 3.5 foot beautiful woman was running around on 2 legs, and was bipedal, was because we have all this postcranial evidence. So you start digging, and if you read Johansson's account, you find a little bit of a jawbone, and then you find some occipital bone, and then you might find some palatine, and then all of a sudden, some of the long bones start to show up, and then before you know it, you have ribs. Before you know it, after that, you start to have a sacrum, right? So you can tell the gender of the sex of the fossil, and then you have a hip bone, a joint, and a wing from the pelvis. And all of this made it very clear that Lucy was a bipedal, beautiful species running around Africa some 3.8 to 4 million years ago. And again, remember what we said about doubling down, right? If you've got the fossil evidence, that's great, but if you have other other evidence, that's great too. Darn, the Laetoli fossils, which are dated to about 3.6 million years, what do they show? They show this, what's that? Go ahead. Bipedalism, footprints. The same footprints, if you go down to the Jersey Shore right now and Macon, right now, would be the same thing. If they got fossilized 4 million years, it's anatomically modern humans were bipedal. Okay, we could say the same thing about Lucy. Because we have, yes.
I missed the connection between bipedalism and greater brain size.
Okay, so, up until roughly about 4 million years ago, our brain size was, about the size of a chimpanzee, right? But what has been hypothesized is that once you free up your hands, right, and you're walking on 2 feet, you've now been able to release yourself from the jail of not being able to explore as well. Because if you can only go on 4 legs, you're not really exploring as well as you are. You can't make things.
So it's like the idea of a brain is a muscle, and the more you use it,
Well, not necessarily, because that's sort of not. But what it is it gives it's the precursor to lead to bigger brains. Okay? Because bigger brain genes have to be passed down. It's not like the more you use the brain, your brain's going to get bigger. Okay? It's that if you're allowed through natural selection to be able to stand and walk on 2 feet and have your hands free, you're going to have a different mode of locomotion and a lot more options to do things. And then those also the things that are surviving are now being able to pass on their genes, and a few of them pass on. Now, mind you, bigger brains don't necessarily mean smarter individuals. Neanderthals had larger brains than we did. Okay? Where are they? Okay, in fact, hold on, I'll do this again. Sorry. So, bigger brain, okay? And they're our cousins, and we have their DNA, okay? What's it missing? Look at the frontal lobe. I make the argument, exactly, it's sloped. I make the argument that everything that we know and exist to be true in anatomically modern humans happened because we happened to develop a frontal lobe. And guess who didn't?
Trump.
We got into trouble. Our frontal lobe has given us our art, has given us our science, has given us our conscience, has given us all of those things.
As well as politics.
Unfortunately. Yes.
and religion.
And
Aren't the Neanderthals that have been found to have had art?
oh, they have art, they have culture, okay? What probably more killed off the Neanderthals than anything else was climate change. These were made at thick, wintry guys, right? If you look at their bones, they look more like Eskimo. Very thick, they're squat. But at the time of the Pliocene, when the Earth is getting really warmer and Europe is getting warmer, they can't compete with these guys. So we outcompeted them. For better or worse. Yes.
I think you're just putting you're whitewashing, but it's probably really what killed Neanderthals were Homo sapiens.
Well, there was interbreeding, and it was climate change, and they weren't producing as fast as us. They had art, they had complex tools, They had language. They had culture. There's no denying any of that. We are so closely related. You can do the same thing if you look at the hobbits at Homo florensis. Same thing. Culture, art, probably spirituality as well. Okay.
So the table.
Oh, I'll put them here. So there are a lot of things. What caused their ultimate extinction, Neanderthals, may have been a combination of things. First of all, there weren't as many of them. When we hit the scene, we bred like rabbits. We outcompeted Neanderthals. And we outbred them.
Why?
Huh?
Why?
There was no cable TV. We had nothing else to do on a Saturday night.
But not for Neanderthals either.
Yes, that's right. So the question is a good question. Why? But the other question is, how did this occur? You know, maybe not. Maybe we won't ever know why, but we do have the process of understanding how, and we know that. Aside from the fact that a majority of us have Neanderthal genome in us now, that by about 50,000 years ago, they're no longer on the scene. And it's a combination of being outproduced, it's a combination of the climate getting warmer, and if you can't adapt, your only option is to speciate, not consciously, right? Or to go extinct. And Neanderthal did not speciate. They went extinct.
But how do we know, as
Right.
is that with his frontal lobes and our typical being aggressive people,
Uh-huh.
we didn't just kill them?
Oh, well, it's a good question, right? So the answer is,
We don't.
in part, probably, in maybe some places. You have Neanderthals, in Asia. You have Neanderthals in what is Eastern European, in Eastern Europe. You have them in Western Europe. But we know by 50,000 years ago there are no more Neanderthals. So you're right. Is it all climate? Well, if you're an Asian Neanderthal, it's probably not the climate. But if you're a European Neanderthal, it probably is because it's getting warmer, right? So it's a combination of factors. Yes.
Do any of the fossils show injuries that might indicate that they were harmed?
Not to my knowledge. I don't have that information. I have. You can see. Australopithecines with tooth marks here, because they're being attacked by saber-toothed animals and being dragged away, right? So you have that type of fossil evidence. You do have some bones that may show evidence of being cut. Now, is it cut for ritual purposes? Is it cut for war purposes? Is it cut for medicinal purposes? Those are the questions that are open. So even if you see a cut, you don't even know the context of necessarily what it is. Am I running out of time?
You're good.
Oh, okay. All right. So I brought Townchild as well. This is a fossil found by Raymond Dart, also in Australopithecine africanus. About you ever see Townchild? Right. So rare to actually find a kid. Yeah. Probably about 8 years old. Right? You want to think? Oh, come on. That's smart. So then, like today, there's no guarantee of life. And the interesting thing about Town Child, who was found by Raymond Dart in 1924, funny story, he had Town Child, which is actually the actual fossil is in Africa still, in a museum, in a box to share with his wife. He was going to a black tie dinner with his wife, and he left the box in a cab. Exactly. Okay. Can you imagine what an oops moment? Like, you know, when you can't find your phone in your own house, but you wound up losing something like as profound as that. Fortunately, the cab company did not open up the box and was able to get the fossil back to the scientist, back to Raymond Dart. But it's an important, very important fossil. I showed you Ardipithecus before. At the same time, you have this wide diversity, right? You're talking about, well, what happened to the Neanderthals? Why would they die out? You know, if they're surviving so well, if you're competing against other hominids at the time, right? You have things like also rounds like this guy. You know, this is a robustus australopithecine, right? And there are several species of robustus australopithecine, right? So there are two basic genuses of australopithecines. There's gracile, and robustus. Okay, so he's living at the same time as the glacial australopithecines, but he's an evolutionary dead end. He's the Neanderthals of Australopithecine-dom, if there's such a word. Okay, doesn't mean that for the time that he and his species and other species like him existed, they weren't the bomb and they didn't fit in and they weren't great or whatever, all that other stuff. They were, but they didn't compete, and they eventually went extinct. Right, and so look at what you could tell. This is the other great thing about evolutionary biology, right? You can tell by the tooth and the enamel and all this other stuff what this thing was eating, right? So it wasn't eating anything small and tender, tough roots, you know, biting into like rock-like vegetables, okay? And think about this as you've got this mid-sagittal crest right here, almost like a gorilla's brain, right? Look at the the zygomatic arches, the muscle attachments that had to go through there to connect to a jaw, to be able to chew. So totally adapted to its environment until its environment changes and then goes extinct. And then, of course, we get to Homo habilis. I have a feeling I'm losing time, so I don't want to go through all of this. But we, of course, see our own species emerge 300,000 years ago. And then, of course, you see all these other competing archaic humans. Archaic humans. If we go back here, let me just go back here for a minute. I'm sorry. I don't want to drive you crazy. But, you know, if you look at the Denisovians, they've got archaic human, they've got Neanderthal DNA. They were having sex with every other species of hominin that was floating around, because if you look at the Denisovian DNA, you find all of it in there. It's like it was a party in the 1970s. I mean, that's how great it was to be a Denisovian. But again, here's the complexity of the story, because it is a very complex story. So when you say, like, here's the robustus australopithecines, you know, they're living at the same time as all these other australopithecines, but they're on their own road, so to speak, their own branch that eventually dies out. Sorry, go through this fast. And here's a very old slide, right? So it's a messy picture. We have lots of contenders to the throne of who are we and what came before us being asked. And this picture's quite old, so it needs to be revived. But you see it time and time and again. And again, this is the beauty of what I think Darwin's evolution has told us, but what the discipline of anthropology, and in particular biological anthropology, tells us not only about our future, but about our present and our past, but also our present and our possible future. And all of that humble growth that leads to 8 billion of us on the planet now starts in Africa 300, maybe 600,000 years ago. We don't even, invent the wheel. We don't hit 1 billion people on the planet until about 1850. Think about how our species has infected or afflicted the planet in a way. Oh, hello. Come on in. Let me warp your mind. Sorry. But we don't hit 1 billion people on the planet until 1850. So think about what had to happen culturally, societally, in order for us to get to, in 150 years, 8 billion. The effect of longevity, the effect of modern medicine, the effect of social change and unions, the effect of liberation movements, the effect of women's liberation movements, so on and so forth. So it's a fascinating story to be told from the human point of view, the anatomically modern human view. But it's one that we could use our science to tell us what happened before and how lucky we are to be here, how fortunate it is. So what does this have to do with the cost of tea in China, as my father used to say, I think that, all humanists, and you may agree, this is this point of the last part of the presentation, which is really more speculative than anything else, is that we sort of, as humanists, we accept the idea that science can tell us and teach us. It can heal us. At the same time, it can harm us. But because of our science, we have the modernity that we do. The fact that we're all alive and here today. 2 aortic valve replacements and a mitral valve replacement. Yeah. Okay. In fact, I had my mitral valve replaced last November. Yeah, isn't that wild? Okay. Doctor said, "When do you want it done?" I said, "After the election." I did. I said, because, pardon the expression, God forbid, had I not made it, I would have felt really bad about not being able to vote. Not good it did, but at least, wanted to be here for that. So we accept science because science helps us form reason, right? We consider, rationality and reason to be a huge part of what makes us humans. We step back from superstition. We step back from innuendo, hopefully. We step back from conspiracy theories. We want truth. We want facts. We want evidence. We want to fill our curiosity, but we want to fill it with something that tells us and informs us more than just entertains us or scares us. Oh, for whom the bell tolls. I think that as humanists, we are incredibly empathetic, and that sort of guides us. There's this real anti-empathy movement, which we've probably seen in the last 6 months. The whole idea of empathy can go, yeah, it will do us in. You know, if you're empathetic, you're weak. Think about that. Yeah, think about it. If you're empathetic, you're weak. How insane is that? How just by its very nature, how we reject that idea, right? In fact, it is because of our empathy that we are here today. Margaret Mead said what made us human was not the wheel, was not fire, was not the fact that we have, you know, Nike shoes and all this other crap. It was the fact that they found a fossil with a broken leg that had healed, that if the person had not been taken care of, they would have died. So this empathy that some sections of the population now and in our government wants us to reject or feel that it's unworthy of us, actually is the thing that makes us human. Probably because of that friggin' frontal lobe. Not them saying that Neanderthals were not nice people either. Not.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, why science don't accept the last Pleistocene mass extinction? 13,000 years ago, there was a mass extinction. 48 million animals, species died in the United States alone. They were die out all over the world, species, animals. So why science don't accept that as a mass extinction?
Well, you know, there are multiple different types of extinctions, right? So there is mass extinction, there's background extinction, there's extinction caused by humans, there's transient, all these other types of extinctions. The last one, right, that science agrees on, it's not that it denies, right? Because there are probably scientists who say, yeah, 14,000 years ago, right? So we go back and we say the Holocene is our time. The Holocene as a geologic time, right? It's about 14,000 years ago. Lo and behold, what's happening about 14,000 years ago? We're moving civilization, right? We're domesticating crops and animals now. We are no longer the victims of the environment, but we are now harnessing the environment for our needs. We're destroying it too, in some cases, absolutely, in many cases, right? So now you've got the Holocene, and you have, you know, by 6,000 years ago, you have Sumer, you have Akkad, you have the Egyptian Empire. Now you're in the world of archaeology, right? Where there's stratified society, there's buildings, physical buildings, there's all these other things happening, and you start to see populations go up, okay? There is debate, to your point, is that what we really should be calling the time from about 14,000 years ago to today is no longer necessarily the Holocene. We should be calling it the Anthropocene, right? The idea that the line in the sand is when we start to take control of the planet is the Anthropocene, right? Now, there's debate in the scientific community if we should even have that label, you know. I personally see a lot of evidence for having that there as an era, you know. But you know, there's controversy in science all the time, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And sometimes new things take their time to work through. So you might feel frustrated that, oh wait, we've had these mass extinctions 14,000 years ago. Why isn't it being globally recognized as another mass extinction? And the answer is, well, science, which tends to be, thank goodness, a very cautious way of looking at the world, wants the facts and the evidence before it goes out. Look what happened to poor Pluto. Right? So, yeah, it's a planet. No, it's not a planet. Well, maybe it should be a planet. So, science is not perfect because humans are not perfect. And that's why stick around as long as you can, because what you thought was true yesterday may not be tomorrow. And so you have, all of these different groups, including the one that I'm near and dear to my heart, the American Humanist Association, coming out with all these ideas about why both science and democracy and humanism should be valued, because each of them form almost like a DNA strand and support each other. It's a three-legged stool, right? And of course you have other people, including my personal favorite, Carl Sagan, saying that, what science does is call out the bullshit of everything else in life. And Bertrand Russell, of course, coming out and saying, without science, democracy is impossible. Yeah. Yes?
Since evolution depended on the success of certain DNA in species being more successful than others, what would happen? I'm hypothesizing that we'll be alive in 500 years and we're not going to wipe ourselves out. With the Earth getting smaller and more DNA combining,
Right.
could it be that we're going to become so much of a similar species that it will
Well, we already
slow
are a
down
very
the
similar
evolutionary
species.
process?
You are, my friend, are a futurist, and I like that. The average species on the planet lives anywhere between 1 to 2 million years. Okay? Given our species is at least, the evidence for our species is at least 300,000 years. Unless we do something really stupid to ourselves, that would mean, based on the evidence and the average lifespan of a particular species, that we might exist for another 700,000 years. Or it may mean that we live another 1.7 million years, right? But no doubt about it, we would eventually speciate or go extinct ourselves, because we are not above this. We are not above natural selection. No species has ever been or ever will be. So what happens to the future of us? Okay.
I remember a Times magazine cover. I don't know.
Yes.
Remember what
With
we
the
looked
big
like?
heads, like that Star Trek creature. It's like really little, and it's got a big brain and everything, and it's like, and it's got little ray guns or whatever, little arms, big brain, as if they don't, So, the question is, in order for a species to adapt, it has to adapt within the context of a particular environment. Right? So you're adapting within a particular environment on a global scale, right? So what might be happening in one part of the globe isn't necessarily happening in another. Right now, we are all part of one species, all 8 billion of us all over the world. That does not mean, and by the way, we know that our bodies are changing even now. Anybody here a dentist? Okay, good, then we'll talk bad about dentists. No. The fact of the matter is, the reason why we have to have our wisdom teeth removed is because our jaws are getting more grace on. We don't have enough room in our jaws anymore for the back of our teeth. Right? The only reason an appendix exists is to burst. So we have vestigial vestigial structures within our body that no longer serve a function. right? The pinky toe, the noble pinky toe, is on its way out. It's getting more and more. It's getting more and more pinky. Okay, so things are still happening, and so to your point, what are we going to look like in 500,000 years from now, assuming that natural selection is still operating, right? Is a really good question. Well, here's the other interesting thing. Check this out. Our brains are getting smaller, right? Think about that. It's not that they're not working hard, well, depending on who you vote for. Sorry, I said I wouldn't go there, I'm sorry. Okay, but the reality is that if you look at the, not archaic human brains, but modern brains, they're actually shrinking in size, which means that the synapses are firing closer together, right? So less brain mass doesn't mean that we're necessarily getting stupider. It means probably the opposite, is that we're reacting differently, right? So this whole idea, like, you know, you go to Star Trek conventions and you see the big brain guys or whatever, big brains don't mean necessarily smart.
I understand what you were talking about with the cover. I was actually thinking about a different cover of the Time magazine,
Okay.
where they figure in a certain number of years we're all going to have Asian features, because the majority of the DNA on Earth is, you know, they're taking the majority and saying, look, this is going to be the predominant features of human beings due to intermarriage and so on.
Right.
I
I think it's speculative at best.
Of course,
Yeah.
of course.
But when you think about it, what makes us one species is the fact that we can reproduce with each other, right? So I can right now leave and go to Nigeria, find a beautiful person who looks completely different from me, and we can have a baby that will be born with our combined DNA and will be able to reproduce. That is the hallmark of our species, right? So when you see the diversity in your community or in New York City, I'm on the subway and I'm looking around and I'm smiling all the time. I'm sure they think I'm a freak because I'm sitting there and I'm saying to myself, my God, look at the portrait of what makes us human, and it's just a really beautiful mosaic.
Well, the point being that in 500 years, if we can get past our basic
500 years is
prejudices,
probably not enough time.
but if we can get past those basic prejudices, and with the travel making it
Yes.
almost like we live on one continent,
Right.
maybe we will all share so
I-
much DNA will look the same.
Well, here's the thing. When we left Africa, we didn't look like us. We looked like Africans. The whole idea of light pigment comes much later in our evolution. And so I think maybe one day we'll all be a lovely pecan tan. And wouldn't that be wonderful if we could see past all of that stuff? But this is one thing that I did want to mention, and the thing that we have to be very careful when we go back and looking at those pillars. 2025 is turning out to be an incredibly painful year in American history. And somebody is agreeing with that. We have now massive, and I mean massive, defunding of higher education. The thing that helps get us smarter and helps liberates and is a form of equality is going down the tubes. We have scientists proudly being told, don't publish in scientific magazines and journals. And if you do, you'll get in trouble, especially if what you publish goes against the dear leader. So we have people being silenced in government. We have withdrawal of funds for things like climate change and climate science. Even if you don't believe in climate change, if that scares you, that idea scares you, let's get rid of climate science. We have reports that are being written just recently, a health report that used AI to quote scientists and scientific studies that did not exist. By this written or being approved by the same person who's told his scientists, don't publish in scientific journals. We have the tacit and sometimes full-out support of what is known as the anti-vax movement now. We have people who are saying, don't get vaccines. We are defunding the idea that you would get any vaccine. Okay? Herd immunity. Okay.
Isn't the silver lining there, though, that the people that support these ideas are going to evolve themselves?
If they don't kill us first, you know, that's the thing. We gotta. That's right. In the world today, do not be this guy. Don't say, yeah, you're right. Yeah, we don't need to have vaccines. Perfect.
Don't die of infectious diseases.
Yeah, exactly. So here are some of and these happened just recently, right? When we talk about science and democracy and understanding science, Lauren Boebert talking about the church is supposed to direct the government. Just this past week, our Supreme Court told Catholic charities that they can be treated like a Catholic church. Right? That we're going to extend what we offer to houses of worship now in terms of tax policy to groups that are just merely affiliated with religion, which is a bold step in the wrong direction, legally and humanistically. Best thing to do, let's all form a church, or a synagogue, or whatever you want to, flying spaghetti monster, whatever it is. If you never want to pay taxes, right? So you have all of these people out there. Marjorie Taylor Greene, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of this separation of church and state stuff. Oh no, I'm sorry. That was Lauren Boebert. So this is all Mayor Adams. It's not just Republicans, right? Look at this quote from Mayor Adams. And it means instilling in them some level of faith and belief. Don't tell me about no separation of church and state. State is the body, church is the heart. You take the heart out of the body dies. I can't separate my belief because I'm an elected official. Right then and there, I would not vote for this. Forget about all the other stuff. But think about this. So you have this within our government. It doesn't necessarily, we don't have to call it a particular party. Okay? But it's sort of everywhere. Yes?
Yeah, and also to add, I think there's an attack on science and democracy for sure, but there's also an attack on being human.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And, I just talked to Jay here, he works for the food bank,
Mm-hmm.
and they've cut about $100,000
150,000 pounds of food we just got cut for Phil, Food Bank in New Jersey. That's only the first cut, and who knows what's going to be in the future.
So I think we all have to be aware, we know what's happening
Right.
in Gaza,
Right.
And the West Bank.
Right.
It's a freaking genocide that we're watching and
Yeah.
we're paying for. So a group of us here have requested that this Red Bank Humanist Society
Mm-hmm.
publish a statement, an open statement to end the genocide, to give humanitarian aid, and what was the last one?
Cut arms.
Cut arms, have an arms embargo. I mean, because we have to fight back against the dehumanizing.
Mhm.
As humanists,
In return, the hostages.
absolutely, and the Palestinian hostages,
Yeah.
10,000 of them. So, I hope we sent a letter to Eric and the board, and it would be great if people could support.
Mhm.
I mean, the humanists of the United States have come out for peace.
Mhm.
There's a lot of great statements by the humanists. It would be fantastic if our group could take a little stand.
Mhm.
That's all. Because we're seeing the attack on science.
Yeah.
We're seeing the attack on being human.
Yes. We,
Well, it could already start this afternoon. We could go and demonstrate as a group
Sure.
with a sign that it is us doing it.
Absolutely.
Are we gonna do it? No, we just couldn't
Why,
talk.
why not? I do it all the time. Not as humans.
Okay, well, this sounds like my class, I like that. This is very good. I really like this. I only have a few slides left, and then I will leave you exhausted, and with my apologies, but again, there was a hand in the back, did you?
I wanted to dumb this question. This is a dumb question, so I wanted to.
No, stop
dumb
that.
it down.
No.
Years ago, I saw this movie called Idiocracy.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that's a very funny movie. It's almost foretelling what's happening.
I feel
Exactly.
like this is what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So as an esteemed intellectual,
Mm-hmm.
how is this true?
Where?
Because I feel like it is. It's you.
Oh.
That, I think about that a lot.
Right.
Because I have so many friends who are intelligent and none of them have kids.
Mm-hmm.
I am depressed about climate change. I don't have kids.
Right.
You know who's having kids? The people that are like, it's fine. Let's
Yeah.
have a, gender identity bursting the fireworks
Right.
that come out quicker blue. And they have like multiple children, and I'm wondering.
And are not
if-
vaccinating them or doing
Yes.
other things. Yes.
So
Yeah.
evolutionarily, how do you think, is this true, and how do you think it's gonna pretend?
Well, all right. So now we're really talking about cultural differences because there are large swaths of humanity that are not going in the United States' direction. So it doesn't foretell well for the United States to be doing this laundry list of the things that I'm showing you from a humanistic point of view, from a social economic point of view, from a diplomatic point of view, and all these things, because you know what? Empires rise and fall. If they didn't, we'd all be speaking Latin right now. Okay? So what we have to understand is we have become so grown and accustomed to America being the leader of the world, for better or worse, right? Richer or poorer. We may be seeing end of empire. You know, when Nero burnt down Rome, it's not like all the Romans just gave up and said goodbye. You know, Rome stayed around for another couple hundred years as Rome. So we may be, and I hope not. You know, my hope is that, not for the sake of war or politics or anything, but I think we had done a lot of good things trying to right some wrongs over the last few decades. And it wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, and there were still people who were complaining, but I think we were on the right path. I don't think the United States is on the right path now. And I'll say that right to the camera. Okay.
I have.
Yes.
We've been talking about evolution,
Yes.
transformation, adaptation,
Yes.
and extinction.
And speciation, yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
And then we talk about humans, and are we going to be of a certain color? How are we going to
Right.
look? What's our brain going to be?
Yeah.
I'm thinking, are we going to annihilate or destroy ourselves as species through AI?
Oh,
Well,
sure.
I mean, why have we not talked about AI?
Right.
And there are robots to do things now that humans can do.
Yeah.
why don't we talk about, are we just replacing ourselves as a species?
We are very
Not becoming different
prophet-
species,
Sure.
but becoming robotic.
We are very prophetic, right? So you have Idiocracy as a movie, The Terminator, right? The reality is that we become so ubiquitous with technology, right? So, who had a laptop in 1975? Who has a laptop now? Raise your hand. Okay. Who had a phone with them in 1990? Okay. Maybe one or, you know, who has a phone with them now? Okay. Anybody here wear a Fitbit or Google Glasses or whatever those things? Ah, there we go. One of those Cura things, right?
Or a ring.
I'm glad it's on that finger and not, you know. Okay, so it was, we carried it with us, okay, and we left it somewhere. Now, we carry it with us when we wake up in the morning until we go to bed. Now we're wearing it, okay?
And chips.
And chips. So the ubiquity of the technology, the question is, is it part of what makes us human? Where do we say that's enough technology? The problem is that and we haven't figured this out for sticks, let alone iPads, the full-on ethics of our technology. Because you can use a stick, you know, to get termites out of a mound and feed yourself, you know, if you're a chimpanzee, okay? You can use a stick to whack somebody over the head, okay? It's the same thing with this technology now. So it's part, you know, it's like Theodore Kaczynski, which I don't want to go to extreme, but you know, he writes this whole manifesto about we need to go back to a different time. Well, where is that line, right? Are we Amish? Or do we like our creature comforts that have given us not only an existence, has extended our lives, but also given us our creature comforts? Anybody here not have air conditioning?
And exponentially, it's going so fast.
Right.
That's the
That
problem.
Right.
do we have any?
That's Moore's law.
Do we have any control on where
Well,
we're going?
you would think, I'm just gonna end the presentation now because the rest
Okay,
of
good
the,
enough.
yeah. You would hope that there would be people in charge who would be making those decisions at the corporate level and also in the governmental level. At least in the United States, that seems to be being abandoned at the government level. That doesn't mean Europe isn't doing it. It doesn't mean other free secular countries around the world aren't doing it. It just means that the United States isn't necessarily doing it. The United States, which has given us everything from Velcro to the iPhone, you know, all of that is from here. So it's a very big question because the next step, I mean, if I've got 2 artificial valves in me right now, allowing me to stand here, what are the ethics of that? How many pigs had to die, you know? Although these are mechanical valves, they're not porcine valves, they're not organic. But the point is that more often than not, our ethics fall way behind our ability to use technology and what we do with it. Go ahead.
You mentioned, artificial heart. I mean,
Right.
if you have a pacemaker, if you have a knee replacement,
Right.
you're a cyborg.
Right.
All
You
right,
have
so-
fillings in your teeth?
All right, is there any talk in your field about that being the next step of evolution, combination of humanity and technology?
There's talk of it. It's called transhumanism, if you've not heard the term. The idea that we become so ubiquitous technology that it becomes synthetic to us. Okay? That we might not be born with it, but things are replaced. Or we start manipulating the genome early on. So like, oh, I want this trait. Oh, I want that trait. Okay? right? So in some cases, right, like, you know, the ethical consequences of, right? So that's not natural selection anymore. That's called what? Artificial selection, okay? The fact that we have bananas that are this big and yellow is artificial selection, because bananas are really about this big and green, you know? And I could go on about that forever. I teach a class on the differences between natural selection and artificial selection. Pretty much everything in our body that we eat, what we consume, unless we're not eating like a raw vegan diet, has somehow been touched by artificial selection. Yes.
That brings a question that's been in my mind. You talked about the acceptance of evolution in the 1800s.
Yes.
But farmers had been manipulating the evolution of animals for thousands
Exactly.
of years.
Exactly.
So why
Artificial
isn't that
selection.
part of the picture that people say, oh, we know what this is about.
Right. Because humans, for better or worse, and because of this big part of the brain here, we have something called an ego, right? Okay, so the same complaints in 1859 about Darwin is that, wait, we're not divinely created? We don't exist for a reason? You know? Is the same thing, because Darwin's dangerous idea is to say that we are part of nature, that we're not above nature. So yeah, we're doing all these animal husbandry things, right? I mean, anyone here have a really small dog, like a Chihuahua or a pug or something like that? That's a wolf, right? We've made that for our own ego, to make these little things that would never exist in nature, right? Right? So that's artificial selection. So yeah, I mean, we've been doing artificial selection since we've settled down, but we take that just as part of life. If we have to now make the leap and say we're not specially created, that there is no designer, well, that's very scary, because if there's no designer, then why am I here? Right? And that gets into the moral and philosophical issues, right? If there's no designer, that means I'm not special. You know, and so, yeah, we'll make Frankenfish, right? We'll make fish. We'll harvest fish on these farms rather than from the ocean, because we can manipulate them genetically, right? But we won't see ourselves as part of nature. And that's the problem. Because anybody who says that I believe we are here for divine reasons is saying that there's something above nature. And science can't say that, because science doesn't look at the metaphysics of life that some people believe in. You know, we can't do that. Otherwise, alchemy would be just as important as chemistry, right? Astrology would be equal to astronomy. You know, creationism would be equal to natural selection and evolutionary biology. And none of those things are. But that's why we have people in a room like you guys, right, who know the difference, who can smell the bullshit when it comes to you. Even if you can't articulate it, you know it. Yes.
So Georgina is suggesting that we have a march along with Pink Codes to stop the genocide in Gaza, and then we carry our own banners. So I think we'll bring a proposal to the board. She will, at least, I think. In closing, can you tell us a few words about Medgar Evers?
Oh, sure. So for those of you who don't know, Medgar Evers, of course, was a slain civil rights leader who fought for justice. He was murdered in his driveway, and his children and his wife saw him gunned down. Unlike Martin Luther King, who sadly died in the Lorraine Hotel in 1968 by a gunman, Medgar Evers was killed amongst his family. Deeply tragic. because, you know, you have Medgar Evers, you have Emmett Till, you have RFK, not Junior. Okay, RFK, who I personally, you know, who was a devout Catholic, but I would have a beer with him any day. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, all of these civil rights. What a period of time that we've all lived through. You know, to see the highs and the lows. You know, that we can have, you know, people's, you know, we can land on the moon and we can create genocide. That is the dichotomy of our human species. You know, capable of such brilliance and goodness, and not. I want to just leave you with one poem. May I?
Sure.
Okay, so this is from an English humanist, George Foote, F-O-O-T-E. Some of you may have heard the name. 1893, he published a book called Flowers of Free Thought. And he quotes a poem by Omar Khayyam. And I always like to end on this, because it's what we do when we leave here that matters most. I sent my soul through the invisible, some letter of that afterlife to spell. And by my soul returned to me and answered, I myself am heaven and hell. So, thank you for your time. One big group hug.
Thank you so much.
Oh no, thank you.
And of course, you're welcome to stay as